Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards Podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this show, we share the stories of challenges and successes from bloggers to podcasters, from writers, speakers, and more. I'm your host, Michelle Jackson. Today's guest is Jillian Johnsrud, author of Fire the Haters, a book that isn't about the FIRE movement, but is all about creating content online and the challenges that may impact your brand. We talk about how different seasons of life influences her business, the pushback on content creators positioned in the FIRE space, aren't they allowed to make money too, and why Jillian has decided not to attend any events in 2022. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Jillian. How are you doing today?
Hello. I'm doing great. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much for being on the Plutus Awards podcast with me today. This whole season, we're really talking about monetizing a personal finance brand. And I wanted to reach out to you for many reasons. One, you're just awesome and you give a phenomenal podcast interview, but your brand and how it's been built out is so interesting to me. And so I thought we would have a conversation around just the tension around monetizing a brand like yours, how you did it, writing a book, all the things. So I have questions. So if you could do me a favor and introduce yourself, who you are and what you do, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I am Jillian Johnsrud. I write and create over at jillianjohnsrud.com. And yeah, I wrote a book, Fire the Haters. I do coaching for people on the FI journey. I'm a speaker at events. I'm a course creator. I'm an event hoster, and I'm on the 5, like it ain't no thing.
Before we even get into how you got into this space, how are you able to do all the things? I'm trying to imagine you coordinating all of the stuff that you're doing. It just seems like a lot of balls up in the air and you're juggling. Could you just share how you make this happen?
Well, realistically, I don't have a 9-to-5 job. That's a big one. I have a super supportive husband who also doesn't have a 9-to-5 job. And the third, probably more practical thing is there's a whole bunch of stuff I don't do. And I outsource pretty much everything that I don't have to touch. I don't.
When did you know it was time to outsource? And how did you even find the right people to help you with that?
I outsourced as soon as I possibly could afford it. Actually, probably before I could afford it, before my business was really cash flowing anything significant. And I started by hiring the wrong people. And I started by being like an awful boss and doing all of the mistakes. Like, oh my gosh, I was the worst. And by the worst, I mean, I didn't have a clear vision. I didn't really know what I was asking for. I didn't really know what I wanted. I would hire people, give them no training, and then just hope that they would magically figure out what was in my heart. And surprisingly, that didn't work very well for me.
It's interesting that you bring it up in this way because I onboarded a virtual assistant last summer. And while the VA was amazing, is amazing, and I'd like to continue working with her, it was really clear that I was the problem with the onboarding process. I was the problem. And it was a little bit humbling and a little embarrassing, actually, because I knew that I needed her help, but the way that I approached it, neither one of us were going to be successful in onboarding. And I felt like most entrepreneurs might be onboarding when they're behind the 8 ball, like under duress. And so they haven't given themselves enough time to really reflect on how is this person going to really support me in being successful?
Yeah, I always encourage people, if you're thinking about that first hire, there's 2 options you can go with. You can go with like the uber professional that knows exactly what you need. They know how to do it. They've done it 1,000 times. They're typically more expensive, but you don't have to be a subject matter expert. Our mutual friend, Steve, podcast editor extraordinaire. You don't need to know how to edit a podcast to have him edit your podcast. Or you can go with a more affordable version. If you have all of the systems, if you have all of the process, if you know how to do this inside and out, and you can like transfer that knowledge to another person, but never confuse one for the other. Never in your mind hire someone who doesn't know what they're doing and you don't know what they should be doing. I hope that it magically works out.
So we're going to backtrack and kind of go on the line of questioning that I just got excited about that topic because I think it is very important in terms of monetization, because you point out that you hired before probably financially you should have with your business, but eventually it worked out. If you could very briefly just share your personal money story and how it landed you in the personal finance space, I think for people who are new to you, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I grew up kind of right at the poverty line. Things were really tight, and there were some challenges in my childhood. And as soon as I got married, I decided I wanted our financial future to look very different. I wanted to have more options and more choices. So we started saving half of our income, just as like a general philosophy. And we had $55,000 in debt. We paid all that down. By the time I was 24, we had invested our first $100,000. And then we bought rental properties. We paid cash for our first house. And I became financially independent when I was 32.
You're very well known in the FIRE space. What has that been like, being in a niche or a niche that people sometimes are at odds with?
Yeah.
So how do you make FIRE relatable for people or folks who are like, I don't buy into this?
I think it's important to realize that all along the journey, there's benefits. I would have been entirely unconvinced when I started this journey at 19 or even 24 or probably even 26 that we would become financially independent anytime before like 60. 60 was my original like reach goal. But in the process, there were a lot of benefits. And I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of retiring forever. So I encourage people like, create some financial freedom and then flex that freedom in your choices, whether it's switching to a job you want or taking a couple months off, or going part-time. It's not a black or white thing. All along the journey, there's benefits if you tap into those.
This is kind of a weird question, or maybe a challenging question to answer, but when did you notice that you'd become a personal finance brand? And were there some unexpected tensions, if any, that came up internally in terms of that?
Yeah. So I started writing about 6-7 years ago, and probably 1 to 2 years in, the FIRE movement kind of blew up in mainstream media. And so it started to feel like a brand when Good Morning America reached out, when I was in USA Today, like when I was in Parents Magazine, and like all of these things. I was like, oh dear, I started writing as a hobby because we were taking a year off. I was not planning to build a brand. And I think the tension for me in the mix of all of this was, am I a hobbyist? Or am I perhaps more a personal brand? Am I myself online? Or am I building a company? What direction do I want to go? Is it going to be me and like 4 or 5 employees who all work remote? Or is it like me and 50 people? And I felt like I had to kind of make that decision. A lot of people started when I did, or in that vicinity. I've seen kind of split off one direction or the other. What are you really trying to build?
So what was your choice? What did you decide?
I went for more of a personal brand. Partly, like I mentioned, I have 5 kids, partly the season of life. I am not a 40-hour-a-week content creator. I'm a 15-hour-a-week if nothing goes wrong in my life. And something always goes wrong. So, kind of picking the scale and the size that works for me right now.
One of the interesting comments that I see often in the FIRE space in particular is pushback on FIRE content creators. It's like the strangest thing that I've noticed over and over again, where FIRE folks have put in all this front end work to be financially independent. I'm not even going to focus on the R because I think that trips too many people up. So you've put in all this year, several years of work into becoming financially independent. You share your journey and it resonates with people enough that it does make money. And there are people who get really angry about the fact that your work makes money. And they're like, this isn't fire because you're making money. What do you think about that kind of dichotomy and thought? I don't understand why it's bad to make money with a project that you're working on. I cannot figure out what is going on with this. What are your thoughts?
I think some of it comes from this idea of like, does the system work? Can you really amass enough to where you don't need income in the future? And so I think sometimes it's viewed as kind of like cheating the system. Although if you look at what a lot of fire content creators make, it's not substantial. And so the other thing with us, we're kind of a squirrely group of people in general, in that I don't need income from my business. So like, if I don't want to do something, I really can't even make myself do it. Like I just can't muster up a false enthusiasm for anything. And so the number of things that we do really gets whittled down to what are we really passionate about? What really matches our skill set? What feels like a good use of our time and energy in this world? And everything else kind of goes away. So my business looks very different than someone who like needs a full-time income. It's part of the reason I hire so much out. I invest a lot in projects because the purpose of income in my business is to fuel and funnel money towards the projects I'm really passionate about. It's not to optimize the profit.
Currently, you're promoting your book, Fire the Haters. If you could do me a favor and share, what is this book about? And was there a defining moment or event that kind of triggered the idea for this book?
Yeah, I'll start with the defining moment because it happened real quick into my online creating journey. I would say like 3 or 4 months. I had an article that I wrote was shared on a large curation site. And for people who don't know, when articles you write are shared on other people's sites or in news outlets, the author very rarely gets to write the title. The title is written by the editor, and the editor picked a very inflammatory, very judgy title for my piece. And this curation site posts, a dozen articles a day. People read that title, went straight to the comments and just went after me. It was so much. And I was a mess. Oh my gosh. Like I wasn't sleeping. I was waking up in the middle of the night with like rebuttals and thinking through this. I was trying to like defend myself online. I was trying to explain. I was trying to empathize with people who were super offended by this title. It was such a mess. And I emailed Jay Money, a mutual friend, because he was my very first blogging friend. And I said, how do you deal with this? I'm a mess. Like I'm binge eating. I'm not sleeping. I don't know if I'm cut out for creating online. Up until this point, I'd always wanted to be a writer. It was like a long held dream, but I was confronted with this reality of like, maybe I'm not the right person. Maybe I'm not the right personality to do this in a public space. And he emailed back and he was like, oh, honey, you never read the comments. And I just thought, wait, what? Like, that's an option? It had never occurred to me. And I decided to keep going. And so I wrote this book. I kind of broke it down into 3 parts. And the first is, how do we deal with creating content online? The haters, the critics, having boundaries with people online, with people who get triggered online, emotional boundaries with our work. Like, are we our work? Is it an extension of us? Like, what happens when people attack our work? All of those concepts. And then the middle part is about just like that internal critic, imposter syndrome, and like fear of failure. And then the last is when things kind of go wrong. When we have failures and setbacks publicly, how do we deal with that? How do we regroup? How do we find the courage to keep going?
What has the feedback been like for your book?
It has been so lovely. It is an ironic thing, though, to write a book about firing the haters and then have people hate on your book. Because you're like, dude, I already fired you. Actually, I have one-star Amazon review, and they chose not to write anything, which I was like, okay, fair enough. No, it's been really good. And I think what I've appreciated most is that a lot of the takeaways in the book, like how to deal with friends and family, how to set boundaries with people, giving yourself the gift of being misunderstood, people have been able to apply to their online life, but just their online life with friends and family, but also their in-person life, their real relationships. There's a lot of crossover. So that's been lovely.
What has it been like incorporating this book into your brand?
Yeah, it was a surprising choice, I think, for a lot of people, because I mostly write about personal finance. I write about intentional living. I don't create a lot of content around online business. And so it was a little bit of a, wait, no, what is the book about? It's not about fire. And so it's taken more time to kind of introduce people to that idea and the acceptance that, yeah, this book isn't for everyone in my audience. And that's okay. My next book will hit a whole different demographic.
I love that you bring up the fact that this book was an unexpected topic from you. I think that when people are creating content online, there are different points in the journey where they may be compelled or pulled towards an area of interest that may not necessarily be the primary one that they're known for. I'm actually in that process right now of saying yes to leaning into one of the niches that I have an interest in, which is online business. Why? Because I created an online business and I'm finding that I have people asking questions and things like that around that. It's hard for those of us who have niche projects, having split focus can be really challenging. And just also it can confuse people in terms of branding and clarity. So because this book is different content than what people were expecting you to create, how were you able to find an audience for the book outside of that community that knows you so well?
I made this as a conscious decision that I wanted this to be my first book, partly because I was just so passionate about the idea. I love talking about it. I love my entrepreneur friends. We love talking about it. I thought it would be a fun book to write, which it was. So I just made the conscious choice of this will take longer. I don't have a massive built-in audience for this topic. To some degree, I'm starting not quite from scratch, but a little bit more, from scratch starting point. And I was okay with that. One of kind of my affirmations in writing the book was, I didn't write this for year 1 sales. I wrote this for year 5 sales. And my plan is really to promote it and to get the word out for the next 5 years. And then we'll see how it does. We'll see what happens year 5 is what I'm probably most interested in. And the nice thing is it does resonate with people. I think there's ideas and there are concepts that are so applicable in our modern life now, where so much of our life is online. Even if you're not a content creator, even if you're not a small business owner, people share more of their lives online and have to deal with this kind of online criticism. So I think it'll get out there eventually, but I knew it was going to take more work up front.
Was it worth it?
I really liked writing the book, and I think it was a good first book for me to write. So far I'm happy about it, but there again, we'll see come year 5. We'll see year 10. If in the whole scheme of things, I'm like, that was a good decision for my business.
Join Julian Sanders, Janice Torres-Rodriguez, Jason Vitug, and more at the Plutus Impact Summit, a virtual event for financial content creators and influencers on July 22nd and 23rd. See all the sessions and register for free at plutusimpact.com.
you host events, you have these different products that you've built out for your brand. Could you share the different things that you've done within your business? I find it interesting that in your case, the revenue isn't so that you can live. So I'm interested in why you said yes to the different things that you said yes to.
I tend to say yes for projects that I feel like there's a large need for, and I feel I perhaps have a unique skill set or a specific skill set to meet that need. And things that kind of scratch my own itch, like things that if I didn't put my energy and my skill set towards this project, it would just come out in another spot in my life anyways. So I might as well like apply that energy towards my business. And, it's hit and miss. Like there's a lot of things I've tried that I'm like, nope, that's not for me. I'm not super excited about that. And it's still an experiment. In my book, I talked about testing and scaling. You can't know the perfect plan when you're at the beginning of a project. It's only through trying and scaling it up and trying that you get enough information, enough experience to make an informed decision. Even this year, I decided to make a big shift in my life. And for this year, I'm not doing any events, any conferences. I'm not getting on a plane to speak, to attend, nothing, to host. It's an event-free year as an experiment of, do I miss it? Is that something I want in my life? Do I want it in my business going forward? Or are there better uses of my time and energy?
I love that you brought this up. So typically what I do with events is I alternate years because I have a lot of different interests and areas of focus. And there's one Michelle and lots of different events. And part of the travesty of my VA onboarding last year was the impact of travel to those events because it was so disruptive. Now, I should say, because of COVID, everything got pushed back. And then once we were able to meet in person, it was like every event that I was supposed to attend happened all at the same time. So this was a little unusual. But this year, I actually spent some time thinking about how travel impacts my focus and just capacity. And so right now, I'm only going to 3 events. That's enough. And one might be taken off the table. It's an overseas event. And I might just say no to it because I feel like it still might not be a good time to go overseas, right? So it could be that I literally do 2.5 events and we're good.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about it. I realized that in going to an event, there's that pre-event preparation. There's attending the event and like being really present. And then there's the after event when you're like decompressing and trying to like leverage everything. And then you have to still get back into the flow of things. So it's very disruptive.
Yeah, there's, especially for big events, there's a very large emotional cost for me. It takes a lot of emotional energy and it can take me 10 days to recover and to kind of get back to my baseline. So it's an experiment this year. And a big part of the reason I attend these events is for the relationships. So this year I'm being more intentional about experimenting with other ways to like maintain those relationships.
So in talking about relationships, how have your relationships impacted the growth of your business and the different projects that you decided to say yes to?
They've kind of been everything. There's no way I would still be doing this. Like there's no way I would still be in the game if it weren't for the relationships that I built and the friendships over these last 7 years. They're massively important to me. And they're part of the reason I still keep going. They're some of my favorite people. I love creatives. I love entrepreneurs. And I want to be in the thick of it with them.
How are you going to nurture those relationships? Because a lot of people will see their besties when they attend an event and they're people. I'm lucky because a lot of people come through Denver. I'll see people all year long. pre-COVID, I saw people all the time. And I feel like that's starting to happen again, where they're starting to travel and feel comfortable with that. How do you see yourself nurturing these connections when you've taken this big piece out of how you would normally see them?
I have two things that I'm kind of in-person things that I'm experimenting with outside of just like staying more connected online. One, we have been traveling a lot and we're going to continue to travel a lot. So being intentional about, setting those things up and meeting up with people and making sure we have that time in our travel schedule. But I'm also, and I'll say hosting in the loosest sense, I'm hosting a get together in Mexico at an all-inclusive resort. And I just sent an email to like 70 people and I said, hey, so I'm going to be at this all-inclusive resort for these days. If you all would like to show up, I would love to see you. And so we have a great group of people coming and I think it's going to be perfect and fun. So doing things like that kind of going forward.
Jillian, I really wish you lived near Bozeman because you would not get rid of me. I'd be all up in your business for because I love that area so much.
You gotta come into Kalispell. I think you will like it just as much.
I bet I would.
Yes.
So you're warned. You've been warned that might be a road trip this summer.
Nice.
For someone listening to this episode who's grappling with monetizing their brand and making decisions around what is going to be impactful for them and for their community, what advice would you give?
I think it's important to look at, honestly, what are you better than the average bear at? Because if you can kind of start with this head start, then all of your success will be amplified. And what are you not great at? Like, what is just not your skill set? And either design your business to where you don't need to do that very much, or it's an easy thing to outsource. It's an affordable thing to outsource. I think one of the greatest gifts that being financially independent gave me in my business is it allowed me to look more honestly at my business. What is a good skill set fit for me? What am I excited about? What creates kind of a passion? And to ignore a lot of the other stuff, because there's 1,000 good ideas out there. There's an endless supply of good ideas, but they're not all great ideas in your specific business. And so to chase every good idea indiscriminately will leave you spread too thin.
How do you build the discernment around making those? Like, how do you become self-aware enough to not squirrel yourself in your business? Do you know what I mean? Things can get so exciting and distracting and interesting. How do you have some self-awareness around what isn't going to work or what isn't working?
Yeah, I use a journaling exercise called superpowers. What are the things that are kind of your superpower? What are the things you're average at? And what are the things kind of outside your self-aware that you like really should not be doing because they take a disproportionate amount of your time or energy? And I keep all of that on a spreadsheet along with kind of just some of my personality things, like what do I enjoy? What do I not enjoy? And, when I'm kind of in the thick of it and having to make a choice, I refer back to that. And I've always had a business mentor or coach who also has access to the same spreadsheet. So when I'm faced with a big choice, like we kind of look through it together. Like, am I being honest with myself, or am I just excited because something's working for someone else or something seems interesting, but doesn't actually fit me or my mission?
What does the next couple of years look like for you? You have expressed that you have a long-term vision and how you look at your business. What are you thinking about and what are you planning for?
The next couple of years are going to be interesting. And I think it is for me kind of a scaling down and a focusing my energy. And part of that is some big lifestyle changes that we're making as a family, some big family choices we're making. It's going to be kind of less is more creation. I'm going to try to get back in the habit of just writing every day. And hopefully those words end up as books, or I create a lot of workbooks and courses, but doing less things every day, less busy work for sure. So that every hour that I'm engaged in kind of work is something that only I can be doing for sure, but it's something that I'm excited about, something that I feel is meaningful long-term.
If someone was making the decision to go into the personal finance space, what would be your number one tip as a content creator?
I think it is focus.
That's a hard one.
When you start, it feels like you have to do 40 different things. But in reality, there's probably one or two things that you do that are going to give you kind of that 80% of your results. And it's so easy to get sidetracked with other things that work for some people, but they might not work for you, or you feel like you should be doing, like creating content on Twitter, and yet it doesn't actually move the needle for you at all. And so giving yourself permission to pick and choose, make an impact with one or two things.
How can we buy your book?
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yep. Everywhere online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target.
I do want to ask one question about your event before we wrap up. Could you talk about developing your in-person event that I really am sad that I didn't get to attend? Is that something that's going to happen again? And what was it like putting together something like that?
It was something I was really excited about because I had been a little bit of an event junkie. So when my husband was in the military, part of his job was to organize events for military soldiers, families, spouses, all the things. So I went to all the ones that were applicable. So I probably went to like 4 or 5 a year. And so I had big feelings and big thoughts about events, having gone to so many other people's events. I had a good sense of what I wanted my event to be like, what I wanted to incorporate in it. And I do a lot of one-on-one coaching. And so I had all of these tools, all of these ideas that I wanted to use in a larger group, in a larger space. And so it was that side of it. The designing it was fun and exciting. The technical side of it and the coordinating, It turns out I like 0%. And so I hired people to do that. And even then, I only like that about 15%, managing the people who were supposed to be managing that. So for me, that's kind of that's a question mark in kind of the future of events. I'm still really passionate about events, but does it fit in my business going forward? I don't know.
I hosted an in-person event and I loved it. It stressed me the hell out. Like the logistics and the making sure that it was in the black. And especially at that time in my business, there was no way it could run in the red. That was not an option. As much as I love that event, people still bring it up. I don't know that I can be hosting events in the future that I have to manage the logistics. I don't have the capacity. And that's something that's been really interesting to discover about myself, because in my previous life, I hosted hundreds of events a year because I worked at an international English center and I had to host events for the students all year long. Any kind of event you could think of, I did. But you know what the primary difference with those events? It was their credit card.
Yeah.
Their budget.
It's so
different.
Hard with a big event to make it profitable or even break even.
Exactly.
It takes a lot of emotional energy to figure that stuff out. And there's so much that can go wrong in that. I've done a couple small events, like under 10 people, and that logistically was less energy for me. That I could see maybe that fitting in, because I really enjoy that. And I enjoy the friendship dynamics that come out of those kinds of events. So we'll see.
How can we find you?
Yeah, Jillian Johnsrud, pretty much everywhere. Although, speaking of things that, I'm paring down, I might not really be on social media this year. I don't know if that's going to fit into my 30 minutes a day content creation or not, but I do write a newsletter like twice a month, which is probably my favorite thing. And I have lots of free resources for intentional living, content creation, personal finance on my site, JillianJohnsrud.com. So there's lots of goodies there.
Jillian, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I love speaking to you. All the best. Keep the pictures coming of your adventures, and just thank you so much. Listeners, don't forget, fire the haters.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.